Is Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender actually good? Well, at the end of the day, that's up for you guys to decide. It is your opinion after all. That is an opinionated question. Now, do I think it's good? Yeah, I think they did a pretty dang good job. Personally, I have not read a single review on this. Every single time I'm scrolling on social media or going through YouTube and I see a video that involves Netflix's live action Avatar, no matter how badly I've wanted to watch it, I have skipped over it because I want to keep all of my thoughts completely my own. I want it unbiased. I have not read a single review. I don't even know what the Rotten Tomatoes score is. Nothing. All I have done is I've watched the live action twice, and I have actually rewatched the entirety of the cartoon between the live action coming out and today. So let's go ahead and jump right into what do I think of Netflix's live action Avatar. We'll talk about a semi-spoiler free summary, episodes that were cut, and notable changes, pros and cons of those. Now, what is a good summary of Netflix's live action Avatar? It feels like a condensed, remixed version of the original cartoon that uses elements that were used in later projects. Things like The Legend of Korra, the comics, I was about to say the cartoons, the comics and the Chronicles of the Avatar novels, specifically the Rise and Shadow of Kyoshi novels. So those are things like the Fog of Lost Souls, and non-Avatar humans entering the spirit world, history of Karuk and Kyoshi that you don't get within the cartoons. And so that's the kind of information I'm talking about, especially Karuk when you're talking about past avatars. What episodes were cut in this Netflix live action? Well, let's go and go in chronological order of the episodes that were cut in the order that the cartoon gave them. The first episode that was cut in chronological order of the cartoon was Imprisoned. And this, for those who may not remember, is the episode where Haru gets introduced and you have this whole story of Katara inspiring this group of earth-bending prisoners who have been kidnapped from their families and taken to this floating metal prison where they can no longer earthbend. The gang, as may frequently call them throughout this video, I'm kind of recording this off the cuff, I don't really have a script. They then steal or relocate a lot of the coal that's in the furnace of this prison to allow the earthbenders to have some ammo to defend themselves. And this ultimately leads to their freedom and to the demise of the George Takei warden. The next episode that they cut was the Waterbending Scroll, which is where you have the pirates, and this is ultimately a very fun episode. What the big thing with this one is Katara and Aang trying to learn waterbending before they make it to the Northern Water Tribe, as trying to learn whatever they can get their hands on. Now, they did include the Waterbending Scroll in the live-action Avatar. That being said, it was included as an heirloom that Gran was able to hold onto after all the raids, and then gift to Katara before she leaves on her journey. I like it, except the one question that comes up with this is, why wouldn't Gran give this to Katara beforehand? If you had to cut the Waterbending Scroll, this is how I would personally make the change while still being able to include the Water Whip Scroll. The next episode, I think everyone saw coming was going to get cut because I don't think I've seen this episode in about 5 years, and I've watched the show, I can't tell you how many times in the last 5 years, and that's The Great Divide. Everyone and their grandma skips this episode. It's literally the only characters going into it that go out of it are Aang, Sokka, and Katara. And it's not a bad episode. It's just the one that Nickelodeon kept rerunning because it was standalone and it could help hook viewers in without detracting too much from the overall story. That's why when you watch the Ember Island Players episode at the end of the series, when they reference the Great Divide and Sokka, the actor for Sokka just says, we'll fly right over it. Yeah, like, even the writers knew this episode is pointless. The next episode is actually a fun one, but it's also unnecessary to have, and I see why the live action cut it, and that's the Fortune Teller. This is a very fun episode. I enjoy watching the Fortune Teller every single time I watch the show on a rerun, or do people even know what reruns are anymore? But every single time I rewatch the cartoon, I enjoy watching the fortune teller. It's a fun episode. But the only thing that's really narratively important here is just reinforcing to Katara that Aang is going to eventually be her boyfriend after the end of the show. Next episode that was cut was Bato of the Water Tribe. And I say kind of cut because the most important aspects of this is introducing June and Lila, her Shirshu. And might I say, it was pitch perfect. They nailed June and the Shirshu in the live action. Absolutely nailed it. Like, literally looks like she popped right out of the cartoon. Fantastic. Arden Cho, I think the actress who played June in live action, did a great job. But the episode itself, Bato and the Water Tribe, was cut. And this leads to, admittedly, one of my cons. I'm going to kind of preemptively get to a con, because the next episode is actually the biggest episode that they cut. Sokka, in the cartoon, does his ice dodging trial with Bato. Ice dodging, for those who may not remember, is a rite of passage for Southern Water Tribe men when they are of age. They go through an ice dodging trial to prove their worth and to show their leadership abilities. Sokka doesn't do this in the cartoon before his dad and all the other men leave. He does this when he finds Bato, or he, Katara and Aang find Bato on their way to the North Pole. And so Bato offers Sokka the chance to do it there, near the town that they're all staying in. And Sokka does it very, very well. Obviously passes. In the live action, it's done before any of the men leave. Hakoda and Bato are disappointed in Sokka, especially Hakoda. Like, Hakoda should never be disappointed in Sokka. He is... No point in the cartoon is Hakoda, Katara and Sokka's father, ever disappointed in anything that Katara and Sokka do. He would be realistic with them, but he would never discourage them. What he talks about with Bato is something that feels forced in anything Netflix does to create drama. And that's one of the changes I'm not cool with. Bato himself defends Sokka, but Sokka overhears all this. And it's a change that I can't get behind for the live-action Netflix. Now, the last episode that they cut that I noticed, or at least the last major plot line, is everything to do with Zhang Zhang. Zhang Zhang being, of course, the deserter, and that's the title of the episode that they cut. Aang is supposed to fear trying to firebend. He tries to do it with Zhang Zhang because, since they're fighting the Fire Nation, it's going to be hard to find a firebending teacher for Aang down the line. They find out that there's a deserter who might actually be on their side, who is a firebending master. This has to be the person who has to teach Aang. Obviously, this ends up being Zuko, but, like, you cut everything to do with Zhang Zhang out of this adaptation. He's never mentioned in this. And it's like, he literally doesn't firebend from this episode until Zuko teaches him in the end of season 3. And that's only after Aang actively tries to trust Zuko, and then immediately after they meet the Sun Warriors and learn the true way of firebending. This is supposed to be a very pivotal episode, and they completely cut it. And this is, if they had one episode that they kept, it's this one. Before going into the strict pros and cons, I want to talk about just a few general changes that I noticed about the cartoon, or the live action and the cartoon. Just a few of the notable changes. Number one is, I think the one that everyone saw coming because they actually announced this before the live action adaptation was released, and that is cutting everything to do with Sokka's sexism. You may hear that and think, isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't people not be sexist? And you're completely right. You are right. No one should be sexist. It's a horrible thing to be. In the case of Sokka in the cartoon, it was used as a arc. Literally, before Katara and Sokka meet Aang, in the first couple of minutes of the entirety of anything to do with Avatar, one of Katara's first lines is calling Sokka sexist explicitly. With Sokka's not sexist, if they're cutting out Sokka's sexism, which is going to be an interesting take and an interesting change that they're making, the importance of a character like Suki is diminished. Because Suki is supposed to be the foil to Sokka's sexism. Or a good thing. Because Suki shows and proves to Sokka that there are female warriors out there just as good, actually even better than him. And Sokka learns that in the cartoon, and by the end of season 1, his sexism's really gone. And then seasons 2 and 3, he really, graduates, for lack of a better term off the top of my head, into being the leader he's supposed to be. Next, let's talk about, in that same episode, the Kyoshi Warriors, they escape the Fire Nation. By the end of the episode, Zuko raids the camp, and they all have to get away from Kyoshi Island on back of Appa to lure the Firebenders away. That's the only way they can get them away, because they really want Aang, and the Kyoshi Warriors are in the crossfire. So what do? They hop up on Appa, and they fly away. In the cartoon, Aang calls upon the spirit of Kyoshi. She gives him a speech about how essentially the Avatar is a Jedi, and they can't, have any sort of formal connections, even though Kyoshi had Rungi and, very clearly had relationships. That's another change, is like, since when is the Avatar not supposed to have any earthly attachments? Roku was married, Karuk was, had a fiance. I think they're, bound to be wed. And then Roku had a wife! Every single past Avatar says that Aang has to give up attachments. That's another thing I'm kind of including with the whole Kyoshi, inhabiting Aang's body to then fight off the Fire Nation. I honestly prefer they have to get away to lure the Firebenders out of Kyoshi Island, rather than Aang just goes full Kyoshi on them. But that being said, Aang going full Kyoshi and calling upon the spirit of her is a really cool substitute, and was actually really cool to see elements of Kyoshi show itself in this cartoon, for lack of a better term. The next change is the fact that there are little to no importances ever put on the solstices. Like, the winter solstice, Aang is supposed to go to Roku's island to meet with Avatar Roku to discover what the heck this comet is. And they sort of include this in the live action. It feels a little weird, but it's there. And that's where Roku has his version of, Avatar, get rid of your earthly attachments and things like that. It's like, no. They never put any weights on the solstices. And that's a change where I'm like, are they going to include that in season 2? I feel like they should, but at the same time, it's like, I feel like I should have already been there. Now, I'm going to go into the cons. These are the changes where I am very clearly not in favor of them. I'm not going to do these in any particular order, and I'm going to start with one that's including Azula, Mai, and Ty Lee. Here is my question. So, in the live action, they included Azula, Mai, and Ty Lee, which I thought, cool, we already get to see Azula, Mai, and Ty Lee, but also I'm thinking, how is this change going to affect the story? The biggest one is Zhao works for Azula, effectively. He effectively is her servant. She's the man on the inside, if you will, that gives Zhao his power. And to me, I hated this change because it reduced Zhao's importance as a villain. Zhao, in the cartoon, is this power-hungry, this egomaniac who's trying to become essentially a legend. In the live action, he's kind of lame. I'm not gonna lie. I love Ken Leung. I loved him in Rush Hour. He was fine as Zhao. Like, his acting and his ability to play Zhao was clearly there. It's just the writing for Zhao, I feel like, diminished his independence as a villain by connecting him to Azula. And Azula in the live action is fine. She does a good job. That, not just the actress, but that's Azula. Having Mai and Ty Lee there, that makes me wonder, shouldn't Ty Lee be in the circus right now? Azula says, I haven't seen you in a long time, I haven't seen you in years, and Ty Lee's in the circus, because that made her feel, normal. And Mai would make more sense to be there. It would make sense that after Omashu gets captured, that she is then brought in, a little bit later to, be with her family as her father takes over for what would temporarily be called New Ozai. I could see that, so I can see Mai being in those scenes, but I feel like Ty Lee should have been kept out and put into the circus, as Azula would then recruit at least her and go back to find Mai and Omashu to create her small, efficient team, as she calls it in book 2. Some stories and characters kind of felt shoehorned in throughout the series, and with that in mind, The Cave of Two Lovers changed a lot from the original cartoon. It's cool, we got Secret Tunnel. You know, Secret Tunnel, Secret Tunnel. Yeah, we got it. We did. Changing it the way they did, we're not going to get it later. Which means we're not going to get the story of Cave of Two Lovers that we originally got. Which, okay, fine. They changed it so now instead of getting to Omashu, and where it could have been connecting these two cities in this story, it's now in Omashu and it leads up to the palace. And now the crystals aren't the answer, it's the badger moles, because they don't see with their eyes, they see with their feelings. And I'm like, that is such a Netflix change. Like, no, it's the crystals. That's what lets Aang and Katara get out without a fire. Sokka does get out with badger moles, but that's kind of the comedic foil to the real answer. Like, oh, how'd you get out? Oh, we let love lead the way. How about you? We let giant badger moles lead our way, and it's a fun moment, but it's still, like, obviously works. And it's like, no, the crystals were the answer. They go in without a fire. They kind of ruined that story by just forcing Secret Tunnel in season 1 and giving Sokka and Katara something to do. I didn't really like the Cave of Two Lovers inclusion, even if they did bring Secret Tunnel into it. Wan Shi Tong kind of felt random, didn't it, in the Spirit World story? Which, the next part I'm going to include with that is, how the hell do Sokka and Katara get brought into the Spirit World? In that scene, that made no sense. Like, they changed the Ko story, so instead of Ko just being an old spirit that Aang can talk to about Tui and La, Ko's now just trying to eat people and take their faces that way. And they completely removed the fact that you have to not show emotion around Ko. Although they really did a phenomenal job in showing Ko, and he's as much nightmare fuel as he's always been, they changed a lot about the rules with Ko. Like, you don't show emotion or else he'll take your face, and, you know, all these things. And now he's just effectively Shelob in Lord of the Rings. My last little point with that is, why the hell are Sokka and Katara in that Spirit World? I know I said that earlier, but I have to say it again. Which then, of course, leads to the Fog of Lost Souls. Like, then you get the whole Sokka thing I mentioned earlier with him, with Hakoda and Bato. Mostly Hakoda bashing him, which Sokka later says was an actual memory, not like a hallucination. That actually happened when he talks to Yue. It's like, it makes no sense. And then Katara, you get the cool backstory with her and her mother and things like that. And it's like, okay, that's cool. So you get to see a little bit of Kaya and all that. But it's still like, really? That's the Fog of Lost Souls? Really? You're kind of bringing that in? And then Aang meets up with Gyatso after talking to Ko, and it's a cool moment that they kind of added in there, which was, anything with Gyatso in the live-action Netflix series is actually a good scene, so Gyatso was really well done. That's kind of it for me with the shoehorned stories. With that, they kind of mixed the stories up pretty well, like having Jet and the Mechanist in Omashu, leading up into the Bumi story, which I'll get to Bumi in a minute. In general, they kind of mixed up the stories pretty well. My only question with the whole, like, the Mechanist and Teo being in Omashu instead of the Northern Air Temple is, how the hell is Teo gliding? Like, isn't he having to rise up all of these, like, layers of Omashu to then start gliding? Like, why wouldn't they just ride up, like, do the same effort just to get to the tunnel? They clearly had to climb up some other tower or something to let Teo get the air he needs to start gliding to get into the cave where they find the blasting jelly. Like, didn't you all notice, like, how is Teo gliding in here? Like, in the Northern Air Temple, it makes sense. Like, he just runs off the edge, or rolls off the edge, and he's gliding. It's perfect. Here, it doesn't make as much sense. So I don't know if the director, or if the adapter really thought about that change. Makes me wonder. The next thing, I actually might as well just get to Bumi. And that is, like, they made Bumi more jaded in this version. Like, he's much more bitter. In the original cartoon, he was senile, maybe. Yeah, he's 115 some odd years old. Like, of course he's going to be old and senile. You know, he's making jokes. And he's making jokes in the live action, too. But he's very clearly angry at Aang. They kept that, like, the King of Omashu is actually Bumi reveal not long enough. Like, they could have held on to that, I think, a little bit more. Aang kind of catches it right away. And then Bumi just, like, keeps hammering home, like, you're maybe 100 years old, but you didn't live in the 100 years. Like, you don't know what it's like. Like, I'm going to be an asshole to you because you turned your back on the world. And, Like, it's just like his games aren't really games. He just wants to fight them and like kill them both because he's tired of, making these impossible decisions day after day for 100 years, which makes sense if you think about it. If you're in that scenario, you might become jaded yourself, but Boomy still felt like they really messed him up. And it's one of my least favorite changes from the original cartoon. Even if Boomy by the end does come around, I feel like he should never have been there in the first place. At the end of the cartoon, Boomy was the first person to help Aang in the end. Like, he tells him, like, you've got a long journey ahead of you. You got to get to the Northern Water Tribe. You got to learn water bending. Like, you can do this. It's going to take time. It's going to take work, but you can do it. And then, of course, Boomy's the first person they go to for an earthbending teacher, which obviously ends up being Toph, but Boomy was still the choice number one. Next is, I'm going to talk about Zuko and Ozai in the flashback Agni Kai. In the original cartoon, Zuko refuses to lift a finger to his father. Absolutely refuses. The setup was perfect. Like, they nailed the adaptation of the setup. When it came to the actual fights, in the cartoon, Zuko doesn't lift a finger. Ozai sees this as weakness, so he burns his son. In the live action, Zuko refuses to lift a finger until Ozai reveals that, but forces him to. So Zuko fights reluctantly, and then hesitates on an actual blow that would hit his father, and then Ozai burns Zuko. I didn't like the change of Zuko actually fighting his father, although reluctantly. I think Zuko should have refused to fight outright, and Ozai then, burns Zuko. Here's a quick one. When Katara and Sokka leave the Southern Water Tribe on Appa as opposed to the canoe to go save Aang from Zuko on the ship, they had never heard Yip Yip yet. How is Appa flying? How do they know what words to say to get Appa to fly? He never said Yip Yip. In the cartoon, as soon as they leave the iceberg, Aang tries it, and then Appa ends up in the water, and they just swim back to the Southern Water Tribe. And then I think they try it one or two more times, and Appa never flies. That is until Katara and Sokka say Yip Yip, and he ends up flying in the cartoon. In the live action, they kind of cut all that, and they just fly on off. And lastly, Aang never waterbends. Watch it. Aang never waterbends unless he's in the Avatar state. And even then, he's, earth and firebend. He never once waterbends in the entire thing. Not once. And to me, I'm like, shouldn't he be learning waterbending too? Like, Katara and him learn it as the season goes on, and then Katara masters it through hard work, and then teaches Aang through the rest of the show. Now, let's go into the pros. The things I really liked about the adaptation, the things that even one of these changes, I'm going to save it for the last one, I take with me, so to speak, when I watch the original cartoon, because the change is just that good. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, the castings. Every casting in this live action is perfect. And can we please talk about Iroh? What's his name? Paul Sun-Young Lee. He's in Kim's Convenience. This dude is a perfect live action Iroh. Dallas Liu as Zuko, fantastic. Gordon Cormier as Aang, perfect.
Kyo and Tio.
As Katara, she does a great job too. Ian Owsley, I think is how you say his name, as Sokka, does a good job. Daniel Dae Kim, Hiroshi Sato himself, and General Fong from Season 2 of Avatar. Yes, he's had 2 roles already in the Avatar universe, now playing Fire Lord Ozai. Awesome. Like, that is Ozai. This show is got pitch perfect casting. Special effects and choreography. This is a beautiful show to watch. Absolutely gorgeous. The bending it looks so much fun. They did a great job on this. And I wouldn't be able to praise it enough, but we got to keep this thing going or else this video is going to be 3 hours long. They actually had respect for the source material. I know I talked about the cons. But I'm picking those out. I'm not like doing this off the top of my head. I do have a little bulleted list. I know I said I don't have a script, but I just have a few points that I'm going off of. They actually watched the show. It's like the first time that people who are writing an adaptation for Avatar actually watched the show. It's amazing. They actually included the invasion on the Air Nomads. They included the genocide of the Air Nation. And it was done very well. It was really cool seeing a bunch of airbenders trying to defend themselves. and ultimately failing. It was heartbreaking, and it was a cool addition that is never shown in the original cartoon for obvious reasons. And leading to my next point, it is a more mature series. It's a TV-14, kind of like a PG-13 version of Avatar, but they still stay very true to each of the characters. And I think that's a great choice. Like, they even have some mild cursing in there. I think Sokka says the phrase kick-ass at some point in the story, which is pretty... I know a lot of people aren't going to like it, but you know, if they're adapting it to be about a PG-13, TV-14 rating, yeah, some light cursing is going to be okay, I think. The stories that they chose to kind of mesh together, so example, arriving in Omashu, having Jet and the Machinist all in like one episode, I think they kind of married those stories in a very well done way. So you can have multiple episodes. They can do something different. They're not going to use the original show as a screenplay and, you know, adapt everything shot for shot. That'd be actually a pretty lame adaptation, although it'd be cool to see. I think a lot of people who really want that out of their adaptations are just kind of thinking relatively shallow. Like, you're going to want something different, and I think this does a good job of meshing stories together outside of how Teo is gliding. And then even episodes that were cut that I mentioned earlier, most of them still get references. Like, they mentioned the Great Divide when Zuko and Iroh were looking for June, and I think they even mentioned the pirates in that scene. Bato still appears in a flashback that we've talked enough about, but Bato still makes an appearance. So new viewers are going to know who Bato is to some extent. And so those are a few examples of, they might have cut some episodes, but they still reference that they exist in some way without, you know, feeling the need to include them. And I'm like, I applaud that. And lastly, the last pro that I will give, because it is so perfect, and when I watched this, I actually watched it for the first time with my mother, who's also an Avatar fan. As a fun fact, she actually made me this t-shirt. I showed, like, we were watching this, I think it was episode 6 of the live action Netflix, where Iroh is talking to Lieutenant G about the Zuko origin story. It's like that half of the episode of The Storm that they're adapting. The change is the division that Zuko speaks up about and attempts to save in that war meeting that leads to him doing the Agni Kai with Ozai and getting his scar, is the same troop. The same troops that he tried to save are now his crew. They're banished with him. And so it creates an element. Like, I've always wondered, like, what happens with the crew in the cartoon? Like, do they, like, cycle in and out? Are they banished too? I had that question myself whenever I'd be watching the original cartoon. Like, what's up with the crew members? Like, shouldn't they, like, be cycling out? Shouldn't you see different crew members to imply that some are going back to the Fire Nation, and, you know, like, shouldn't that be the case? But you never see that. And now they answer it, and they're like, yeah, that's the troop that Zuko tried to save. You like him so much, take him with you. And it's such a good change. I take that with me whenever I watch the original cartoon, that those troops are the troops that Zuko sacrificed for in that war meeting that left him getting scarred. And that's where I'm going to generally end this review. If you made it this far, I know it's a bit of a longer video on my channel. I just want to thank you so much for watching it if you made it to the end, just because when it comes to Avatar in the future of this channel, I expect to make similar Avatar videos to the ones that I was making for superheroes, and those superhero videos are still going to continue. I'm just kind of adding another branch of content to the channel. And so, comment below what you thought of Netflix's live-action Avatar. I cannot personally wait to start looking up what other people think about it, just because I forced myself not to for the last couple of weeks. And I am going to have a blast talking about Avatar here in the foreseeable future. So, if you haven't already, please subscribe if you haven't already, like this video, and have a very lovely day.